In every heartache, there's a hidden seed of strength. Join Portia Booker on the Grief Grantor as we journey through stories of resilience, finding gratitude in the echoes of grief. Together, we transform sorrow into strength, pain into purpose. Welcome to the Grief Grantor, where your healing journey begins.
Why, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode here on the Grief Grantor. I hope everybody is doing amazing. Is it just me, or it seems like time has accelerated, right? Like when I think back to my journey of getting to where I am today with the Grief Grantor, it all seems like it happened yesterday. So you guys, something popped up on my Instagram the other day. It was a memory of one of the interviews that I did on Grew with Portia. And for those of you who've been following my journey for a long time, you guys know that I started Grew with Portia as a way for me to interview cool people around the world and share their story, because that was something that I didn't get the opportunity to do when I was in TV. And when I think back to when I started Grew with Portia, I had no intentions, y'all, of sharing my story. No intentions at all. I had no intentions of talking about me, talking about my story, talking about anything about me, right? But the thing of it is, the day that I opened up about my story, y'all, funny story, in May of 2020 is when I opened up about my mental health journey. And when I started talking about my mental health journey, that's when I started to see more traction come my way, right? It was like a weight finally lifted off of my shoulders because I was carrying this around, right? And I share this story with all of you today because those of you who are going through obstacles, different circumstances in your life that you deem that people don't want to hear it, or I'm too embarrassed, or I'm too ashamed, you guys, use your story as a way to excel your brand, right? I never would have thought that me talking about my mental health journey would land me on TV, would land me in magazines, would land me on billboards. And so I always remind each and every one of you that your story is not for you. I'm going to say it again. Your story is not for you. Your story is to help other people from making the cemetery wealthier with all the goals, dreams, and aspirations that were never brought to fruition. So I challenge each and every one of you today to ask yourself this question. What is so bad about my story that somebody else hasn't gone through it? Think about that for a minute. What is so bad about your story or your obstacle that somebody else hasn't gone through at some point? Okay, think about that today as you tune into this conversation. So we're going to go to our first quick break right here on the Grief Grantor, everybody. And when we come back, we are going to be joined by a very special guest from Switzerland, who is a very good friend of mine, I must say, who is going to share with us how we can leverage personal branding by using our personal stories. So we'll be right back here on the Grief Grantor, everybody.
Hi everyone, I am Sinead from Bredor. I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa. Please join me in my Power Hour every Sunday, 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on E360 TV. Mwah!
All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. As I mentioned, we are joined by a very special guest all the way from Switzerland. So welcome, Jessica Fabrizi, also known as JFab, your personal PR strategist. How are you, Jessica?
Thank you so much, Portia. It's such an honor to be here. So hello to you and hello to everybody. I'm well. Thank you very much. It's 6 p.m. nearly here in Central European time. Days are getting longer, so it's not dark completely yet. And so that puts you in a good mood. How are you?
Jessica, every day is great that ends in Y, and I'm around like a donut. Seriously. Jessica, I'm going to do this conversation a little different, right? Because me and you are both entrepreneurs, right? And as we know, embarking on any new endeavor, whether it's entrepreneurial, whether you're going back to corporate, whether you're going back to school, whether you're, expanding your family, whether it's with fur babies or two-legged babies, whatever it might be, there tends to be a level of grief that's also present when these new endeavors come into our lives. So I'm curious, Jessica, for your journey, right? When you think back to your pivot from your last corporate position. How did you show yourself some grace during that season?
Mm-hmm. That is such a good question, a question that I've never been asked, and so I'm super honored to be able to respond to it, and in the presence of your audience as well. And so I have to say that, to be honest with you, this grief didn't only start when I decided to make the pivot, but even before, because I was at Singapore Airlines, my last corporate job, for 6 years. And during those years, I already knew that something was going to change sooner or later. I didn't know exactly when, but when a lot of people ask you, okay, what is the next brand that you're going to work for? Because I have always worked for world-renowned brands, first in automotive, a couple of brands, and then like a few brands actually, and then aviation. Then actually, when you work for Singapore Airlines in aviation, there's no better than that. Singapore Airlines is the most awarded airline in the world, right? And so I was thinking, if I want to improve, I can't really work for another aviation brand. So which industry do I want to go to? Do I want to work for Apple? And then I thought, no, it's too political these days. Also, there's a lot of regulations as well. And so through time, I understood that I was actually the next brand that I was going to work for was actually going to be JFab, namely myself, right? But it took time. And I have to say that during this process as well, which lasted maybe 2 to 3 years, there was already some grief that was coming in, because I knew that I wanted to start my own brand, actually to monetize my own brand, because I had already had a personal brand for like 10 years as a global super connector, especially. But I knew that if I wanted to really pursue this new personal brand from a monetization point of view as well, from a business standpoint, then a lot of things would have had to give when it comes to corporate, because corporate is not just a prison. Corporate has a lot of of good aspects as well. And so especially with the job that I was doing, I was constantly traveling all around the world, and I had a lot of perks, and I was traveling business class, and I was like really jet setting all the time, which was tiring, but it was amazing at the same time as well. And I knew that that had to give. I have to say, then COVID hit, and then all of these perks were gone, the traveling especially, and the experiences. And so it was easier than to leave the job, right? But I have to say that, it's grief, of course, when you change careers, and especially when you leave any corporate, when you leave any brand, unless you're running away from it because it's a nightmare. But like, there's always something that you will know that you will miss. And I think the grace that you have to give yourself is not to maybe reframe it too much. I'm an advocate of, reframing things, as personal development teaches us. But sometimes we over reframe, and sometimes we just have to listen to ourselves and listen to our grief and listen to, our FOMO as well, of things that we won't be able to do anymore, and just accept it, right? I think like the power is in the duality. And so looking forward to the future, but then at the same time appreciate and maybe miss the past as well. So this is how I navigated it.
Jessica, something that I heard you say multiple times is that the grief started before you actually made the pivot from corporate into building the personal PR brand of JFab. And I'm curious, Jessica, when you think back to that time, right, being the global super connector that you've always been, that I've always known, what did that grief journey look like to create community? Because let's be realistic, when you oftentimes close one door, right, not all the time everybody who you knew behind that closed door comes with you. So how did you navigate that aspect of the grief?
Yes. And I have to say, when it comes to, switching from corporate to entrepreneurship, in terms of connections, relationships, network, and so on, it wasn't that difficult, because luckily, for example, all the journalists that I used to work with, and maybe not all of them, but most of them, journalists that I used to work with, during still my time representing these world-renowned brands that I mentioned, I actually developed a friendship with them, not just a professional relationship. And so we stay in touch. So I'm still in touch with journalists that I used to work with, even way before Singapore Airlines, when I was at the Fiat Chrysler group, when I was at the Peugeot group as well. I'm still in touch with them. And same thing with a few journalists that I used to work with at Singapore Airlines. We also traveled together, or we would go out for lunch regularly. We still catch up with one another. We go for coffee, or we meet up online, which is the most practical solution. So I would say that wasn't, like in my particular case, it wasn't the biggest problem. Of course, there's some people that you have to leave behind because it's not possible to bring everybody with you. You can't be friends with everybody because we're talking about thousands of people, of course. But to be honest with you, what I noticed the most, and it is very interesting, and I think that's going to be the topic of my book. I thought it was going to be something else, but I think it's going to be this, at least the first book. This is something that happens when you switch, when you're a global super connector. Let's preface this, and then you switch from corporate to entrepreneurship. Something very interesting happens, Portia, because before you have your job in corporate, right? And so you have your salary. And so you have your lifestyle, which is related also to the brand, because, for example, you're constantly traveling and, business class and the best hotels and Michelin star restaurants the whole time. You're hanging out with celebrities, also influencers and so on, right? So everything is covered. The lifestyle is covered and the salary is covered as well. But you are a global super connector, and you can connect all of these people together all the time on, through one-to-one introductions and through hundreds of communities that you have started. You do so out of passion, right? When you move to entrepreneurship, you think, okay, I am going to also leverage my network. I've been adding value, creating so much value for people for over 10 years, right? I probably can count on them now that I go on into entrepreneurship. And I'm not saying that they have to become my clients, but I'm saying that they maybe can refer you, right? You would expect this, right? No, at least in my case, that happened really rarely. And so people, and so you find yourself in a weird situation in which you're still a global super connector, you still have all of those relationships, and you're still adding so much value, and people expect it from you because you have a track record, because you have a reputation. Even you people expect this from you because maybe they get connected to you by people that have known you for many years. And so they know that you're a giver and you're generous and so on, right? But then there's no salary coming from a corporation, right? And so I have to say that in this moment, you have a lot of grief. Going back to grief, right? There's so much grief, and you say, oh my God, I love being a super connector. I don't want to stop being a global super connector. But at the same time, I also need to monetize, right? And so you miss the times in which you still got your salary at the end of the day, and you still got like amazing holidays and and experiences with celebrities, like luxury experiences and so on. Not that I value those that much anymore, because now at 42, my values have shifted as well. I'm more into contribution, but back then I was more into discovery, right? And so this was interesting and relevant for me back then. So I have to say that in this journey, in this shift from corporate to entrepreneurship, Portia, the grief has been massive, and it has taken time to process it. From an internal point of view, like a psychological, moral point of view, but then process it also from a business point of view as well, because you realize very quickly, I can't really count on my network. And so then, of course, you develop other ways in order to get clients and then, of course, still have a business, be able to have a business, right? Yes. So it's probably not the answer that you expected, is it?
Well, Jessica, no, you added so much to it, right? Because when we think about community, right, you already said it, not all the time they can go with you on this new excursion, new endeavor, right? It's the same, like, for example, when somebody transitions, right? Both of my parents have transitioned in the last 2 years. And there's people who have been a part of my journey through them. But now that I'm on my own, I've had to close that door because I'm not my mother. I'm not my father. The relationship that they had with them is not the same relationship that I have with them. Yes. Right. And to your point about the grief of, oh, I was once experiencing all these luxury brand experiences, right? These hotel events or, meeting with celebrities, influencers. And I thought that I would be able to count on some of these individuals since I embarked on my own journey, but that's not the case, right?
Yeah.
And Jessica, I'm curious for our audience, right? When you bring up the word passion, right? Even though the profit may not always add up to the passion just yet, right? Just yet. How can anybody, use their passion and reframe the way that they see it to start to generate a form of profit, whether it's a slow drip profit, such as a podcast, or even doing TV interviews like this? How can they reframe their mindset when it comes to pursuing their passion in order to attract profit?
Yeah, this is such a good question. Also, because a lot of people, they tend to get discouraged already in the beginning when they don't get the support that they thought that they would have. In my case, through their network, and then maybe they just park the idea of being an entrepreneur and really fulfill their passion. Or maybe they don't park it. Maybe they put it in a drawer forever and they throw away the key, right? And then they think, okay, I had my try at entrepreneurship. It didn't work out. Let me go back to corporate, right? So I see a lot of people that actually, give up on their dream too soon. And in my case, the fact that, it didn't work out that well through my network, of course, surprised me. It kind of shocked me as well. I'm not going to say that I was happy. Of course, I went through this grief that we just talked about, right? Which has its stages as well, as you so beautifully explain. But then at the same time, my passion, my intent was so clear, my purpose, because it's a matter of purpose as well. It was so clear. Then when I thought, okay, it didn't work out this way. This is not the only option. There are going to be other options as well. And so I explored them. And I found them as well. I'm not going to say that it took 2 seconds in order to find other ways, to monetize, but it happened, right? And so I think it's really important to talk about passion as you did, and to talk about purpose as well, because when you have a purpose, when you have a why, right, which is probably embedded in your emotions, like in your heart, more than in your brain, then you will find ways in order to fulfill it, right? But it has to be, I think it only happens when you have passion and a purpose, because it feels like you can't do anything else than this. For me, it's so clear to me that this is what I have to do in the next stage, in the next phase of my life, now that I'm in my 40s. And so I'm not available, for other options. And so I will find ways, and I found ways, of course, to make this happen. Yeah.
And like they say, that's kind of like the difference between the go-getter and the one who's, likes to just sit on the couch, right? They find a way. They make a way out of no way. And I think that's the beauty of entrepreneurship, right? Is you get to chase your passion. It might take a little bit of work, right? To start to see the drip of the fruits of your labor, but it will at some point make into fruition at some point, right? So we're going to take a quick break right here, everybody, on the Grief Grantor. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Jessica. We'll be right back.
Are you ready to illuminate your path and embrace your true purpose? Welcome to the Secrets of Being retreat in the breathtaking landscapes of Costa Rica. Experience a life-changing journey, surrounded by the vibrant energy of nature. Make connections with like-minded visionaries and change-makers like yourself. Discover the power of love and light, as we dive into transformative workshops, guiding you to unlock your highest potential and radiate positivity. Connect with the wisdom of the earth, immersing yourself in the beauty of Costa Rica. Let nature inspire your journey of self-discovery. Awaken the visionary within, and let your light guide you to create a positive impact on the world. Join us at the Secrets of Being retreat and shine bright. Reserve your spot now and take the first step towards a purposeful, inspiring life. Embrace the secrets. Embrace your light. Embrace your being.
All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. We are joined by Jessica Fabrizi, and we were just having an amazing conversation about how to really fuel your passion, right? Go for your passion and also know your why, right? And understand that the grief is there, right? But learning to become friends with your grief in that process, in that journey to really create the life that you want. Jessica, before we go into the next part of the conversation, if one of our audience members wants to connect with you and learn more about your work, is there a website or a social media handle you can share with us today?
Yes, definitely. I think the easiest would be Instagram. Why? Because I go live every day there. And today is day, I think, 459, right? I think so, right? If not, it's like 58 or 60. But anyway, nearly 500 days. Very soon it will be 500 days. And so you can join me every single day because I go live at the same time. So you can join me there. You can ask me questions. We can have a conversation. So it is JFab as my nickname, .relations. It's my way of doing public relations. Instead of public relations, it's JFab relations.
You know, Jessica, and you're right. I do see you. I do get a notification that you're going live, and I'm like, how does she do it? And, you know, Jessica, that jumps right into like my next question, right? Right. Obviously, you've gone live for over 450 days easily, right? And so how can individuals, right, using go lives, right, to share their personal stories, right, whether it's through grief, whether it's through, you know, overcoming an illness, right, how can they use that to transform and build credibility and authenticity for their brand?
This is such a good question, Portia. You asked the most amazing questions because this is something that we need to clarify. You know, there's this wave of authenticity that a lot of people have been talking about, and I have nothing against it. But at the same time, being in public relations, like you, having like the media background that you have, Portia, in different channels, TV, radio, podcasts as well, we know that we have to deliver something to the audience that is of interest, that is relevant. And I see a lot of people that in the name of authenticity actually produce things that maybe are aligned with them, but they're not really relevant for the audience. And then they don't get traction, which is a pity, especially when actually that personal brand is a business or should be a business and not just a hobby, right? So we have to be really careful. We want to find a sweet spot between authenticity and alignment on one side, and then on the other side, also relevance for your audience. So this is something that I have to say, number one. Number two, when it comes to telling your story, I believe that this is something that we have to do because there's power in it. And as you say, always say, Portia, our story is not for us. It's actually for our people, right? For our audience. And it's a beacon of hope for them, especially if they are at the beginning of a challenge that we have overcome, right? Absolutely. At the same time, I think that we have to be careful when we tell our story. We have to tell the story from an empowered position. And I think here, this is usually what I recommend to my clients as well. Maybe we can talk about it. And so I always ask this question, listen, is the problem, because usually we talk about a challenge, right? So is this challenge still present in your life, or was it in the past and you've overcome it and it's also processed, you have integrated it? If so, if it's integrated, then it's kind of over. Then I would say, yes, you can tell a story, even if it's a big story, maybe it's a serious story as well, right? But if you are still in the story, like in the challenge right now, then we need to be careful. And I usually ask this question, okay, you still have this problem right now. Is it a big problem, like a very serious one? Or is it like a minor one? If it's a minor one, you're still in the problem, then you can also tell it, oh yeah, guys, you just go live. Oh my God, guys, you can't believe what happened to me today. And I'm still in the midst of it. And I don't know what's going to happen. But you can tell it in a funny way as well. Or you can be, annoyed as well. But this is something that is not too bad. Maybe something logistical, right? So these are stories that we can tell. But if it's something huge, I think that we should wait until we have processed it at least a little bit, because otherwise the risk is huge. The stakes are very high. Otherwise, we lose two things. Number one, our authority, and number two, our leadership as well. Authority in the sense of that we are competent. We know how to overcome the problem, right? The challenge. So if we speak about a challenge that happened in the past and we were able to overcome it, maybe we even developed a methodology that we now help people with, right? And this is like very common in coaching. Then you can see that you have the authority, you have the competence to overcome the challenge. You've made it. And this is something that you help people with, right? Okay. So the authority. And at the same time, the leadership as well, which actually stems from the authority. The moment you have the authority, you know how to solve this problem, then you can actually help other people as well. And you make it your mission to help other people. And this is how you develop leadership as well. And a coach has to have leadership, right? So I think that, yes, it's powerful to tell your story and do so every day also on live streams, but we need to be really discerning. We need to be careful. And so, there's a lot of thought that goes into this on TV, in brands, social media as well. Usually, I'm not going to say that these tales, these personal stories, especially on social media, are always 100% curated. There's a lot of spontaneity, but the people that do it well, they always put a lot of thought into this. What they say, at which phase they're in of this particular challenge, how they tell the story as well. Is it, for example, the format of the hero's journey? This is perfect, right? Because you have a challenge, a choice, and an outcome at the end. And so the outcome usually embodies, then of course, the authority and the leadership, right? So I'm not saying I am, advocating against authenticity in storytelling, but there's a way to do it right. What do you think, Portia? Would you agree? Because you use storytelling as your main instrument.
Yeah, and you said it, Jessica. You said my favorite word, discernment, right? I don't tell every part of my grief journey. There's certain parts that I filter for a reason. But when I get the nudge to speak on social media, whether it's going live or doing a podcast interview or something, or if I create a reel, there's a particular message that I want you to take from what I'm telling you. And I love how you brought up empowered position, right? Mm-hmm. I think this is where there tends to be a gray area when it comes to the social media platforms, right? Because that's what I'm seeing in the grief space. There's a lot of, I'm bleeding on everybody unintentionally, right? Or whether they're talking about their book, where they talked about a time when they watched a loved one transition, right? There's a way to do it in a position of empowerment that honors, number one, you're part of the story. You're the character in the story, right? But it also puts your audience as the main character too, so they can see themselves in your shoes. I think sometimes there's still this level of what I call the Chicken Little effect. Sometimes the sky is falling on social media. So it's like a lot of people jump on that level of FOMO unintentionally. Sometimes they just want to go live just to get an audience, but I take time to think about when I'm going to go live. Whenever I do any of these shows, I have a script that I read through before I hit record. Like, okay, this is what I'm going to talk about in the very beginning of the show, right? I introduced the show talking about my mental health journey, how I did not want to share anything about Portia's being diagnosed with anxiety, depression, then bipolar disorder, and all the things. Like, I've shared it on different podcasts, but for this, I didn't want to share it in that way, right? And so I think, to your point, Jessica, discernment is key when you're going live, right? Your story's valid, 100%. All grief is valid, 100%. But it's all about the message that you're trying to convey to your audience. Are you trying to continue to convey a message that your grief is going to keep you a prisoner? Or are you going to convey a message that your grief can be used as a way for you to help other people?
Yes, it's not about you, sharing your story in the midst of it in order to get support, moral support, logistical support, any kind of support. It's not about you. You're telling the story for the others, and that's why you have to have processed it and you have to have a message that you can help people with. Exactly. That's the point.
And I think, Jessica, just again, going back to discernment, like using discernment when we're going live, right? When we're talking about our hurts, our pains, right? Really having what you said, the challenge, the choice, and the outcome, right? What's the outcome that you want to deliver to people, right? Like, how did you overcome this? How did you use a different mindset of reframing? Like, Jessica, in my mind, grief has become my friend. Grief has become my best friend. And I see so much on social media that people are like, oh, I don't like grief. Well, nobody likes it, right? But why don't we? Who planted that thought in your mind that grief was a bad thing? And I think we need to take more time to really pick back those layers and ask ourselves, why do I believe what I believe about this?
Yes.
And if there's a disconnect or a discrepancy, right, let's unpack that, right? Let's debunk it, right? And they've already said that the 5 stages of grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote them for people who were transitioning, from what I understood. She didn't write them for people who were grieving. She wrote them for people who were transitioning so they could let go of, any guilt or shame or anything like that. So again, I can go on a whole tangent about that, Jessica. I can't, because it's, but moving right along, Jessica, this is why I'm glad we had this conversation, because I think there's so many people who they want to build their brand, right? They want to use their personal story, which your personal story is part of it, right? Your story is what helped the brand to, be birthed. So I'm curious, Jessica, being the amazing super connector that you are, right? Can you maybe shed some light on how super connecting within, maybe it's people who are grieving or people who are, prepping for a marathon, right? How it can help them to not only amplify their philosophy, but also their brand message.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think that, first of all, maybe we should introduce the concept of super connecting. What do you think, Portia?
Yes, introduce. Yes.
Yeah, shall we? Because I always talk about the difference between the networker and the super connector. And so both have lots and lots of relationships, which is amazing. But the networker is a little bit, how can I say, more stingy. And the super connector is more generous. What does it mean? It means that a networker thinks, oh my God, I have all of these relationships. It took me so much time, years, a lot of investment in money, of course, because especially back in the days, you would go and have lunch with people, have coffee with people. You will invite them to events. You will invite to whatever, right? So it is like a financial investment as well, a lot of energy in order to build all of these relationships. And now I'm not just going to introduce these people to one another, because to introduce them, it takes 5 seconds. How long does it take us to create a group on WhatsApp? And basically then just write one word that they had in common so they can take it from there. It takes you 5 seconds. Okay, 8 maybe, right? And so like all the effort that we've put into building these relationships over years and years, we can share it with somebody else in 8 seconds. And so the networker doesn't agree with this and says, no, I don't want to do this. And it doesn't do it. They didn't do it. The super connector does it. And they connect people on a one-to-one basis. They make introductions, but they start communities as well, in which there are groups and, a lot of people in the same group. I have hundreds and hundreds of communities. And I think that the way we do it, like the why we do it, is because, first of all, we want to add value to people. And so we really want to help them. And so I will introduce people not like just, casually or randomly. There will always be a reason why I introduce somebody to one another. They have at least one synergy, one commonality, right? And potential to create something together. And so I do it for them. And so you're helping 2 people at the same time, or maybe even like many people at scale, because it's a group, maybe a community. But then I do it for myself as well. And we're going back to passion here, Portia, because it's fun. The moment I see 2 people, I'm communicating separately with 2 people that have something in common and they have synergies in the sense that they can really create something together. There's potential there. I can't help myself. I have to make the connection immediately. Like I'm like a child who can't contain themselves, right? And this is this is passion. This can't be described, otherwise as passion, right? And so I think that if you are a super connector, of course, if you're a networker already, you know a lot of people. But I think that if you are a super connector, sharing your personal brand, sharing your philosophy as well is a lot of fun, and it's very, how can I say, convenient as well, because you can do so at scale. This is something that the networker can't do. The network is one-to-one, a lot of one-to-ones. The super connector is more of an entrepreneur, so to say, and thinks at scale, right? How can I scale this? You can only scale, of course, you can always get to know more people. I think I've got 40,000 people in my network, right? Super active. It's not that I talk with 40,000 people every day or every month, but I really have a big network of one-to-one relationships. But then in order to scale it, to bring it to the next level, I actually create communities. Back in the days, already 10 years ago, Portia, the way I was actually creating communities is just because, of course, I saw the synergies that people have. And I thought that it was even cooler to put them in a group instead of bilateral relationships. But then I would do it also because I was constantly traveling. I was constantly jet setting, and I needed a way to actually structure my network. And so then I created, I have 100 groups for different cities of the world to which I would go. And so if I was in a city, even just for a meal, I would then text the group instead of texting 30 people individually, right? So there was a logistical part of it as well. And I think that when it comes to, your philosophy, you said philosophy, you said personal brand as well. I think that being a super connector and so starting communities is actually great, because if you have something like a certain value that is represented in your brand, you can create a community around that value. Maybe you're not really creating a community around your personal brand. There's always something that you want to offer, some value that you want to offer. We're not gurus, or we're not, people that love themselves so much that they create a cult around their person. We're not going to that level, but maybe, the purpose that you have in your business or in your brand, the values that you have, maybe there are similar stories as well. Or maybe, for example, a marathon, you mentioned a marathon as well. Okay, I'm preparing for a marathon. Let me create a community of people that are getting ready for a marathon. Maybe they're local, and so we can go and run together, but maybe they're not local, but they're spread all over the world. But we're all preparing for a marathon. We have this in common, and we can exchange. And there's so much value that can come out of this, right? And so I think being a super connector in this case is about creating communities, and it's an amazing thing to do for the context that you mentioned.
And I love, Jessica, how you really broke down the difference, right, between the networker and the super connector, right? Because it's kind of like when I look at the word net, right? It's tight net. So it's not versus super connotates big, extravagant. I mean, I'm here in Cleveland, Ohio. So one of the things that a lot of people know about Cleveland, Ohio is Superman was birthed here. Superman. Yes. So we think of Superman, he's saving the world, right? He's doing all this amazing, super extravagant stuff, no pun intended. So it's interesting, Jessica, kind of the difference, right? There's this thought pattern that, the networker is, going to be the super connector, right? It's kind of like how people mix up the word grief and mourning. Grief and mourning are two different words. Mourning is the response to the loss. Okay. Grief is more of the state of being as a result of a loss or change.
Okay.
So it's kind of the same thing, kind of like what you're mentioning. The networker and super connecting are very different. They might do similar functions, but it boils down to, number one, the discernment, right? Number two, the passion. Number three, the philosophy, right? Is my philosophy deep rooted in financial gain, or is my philosophy more deep rooted in connecting with people all over the world and, making the world better through genuine, honest, authentic connection?
Absolutely. Yes. And you're right, because the networker usually is more focused on business. Or business, bottom line, basically in business, right? This is why they're doing it, because they know that there's value in having a lot of relationships. And so, I don't know, it could be new clients, referrals, whatever, right? And so, yes, that's true. And maybe they don't even like people. They don't even like networking, but they do it because they know that there will be a financial return, right? Whereas a super connector, of course, a super connector loves people. Of course, it's their passion. It's clear.
You know what, Jessica, we're going to go to break because I'm going to start laughing. We're going to go to break right here on the Grief Grantor. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Jessica. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm Dawn Livingston, your host on the Transcend and Succeed show. Join me Fridays at 2 p.m. Central for limitless inspiration and ways to help you transcend your limitations. Tune into the Achieve TV network and the Voyage to Vitality channel. Transcend and Succeed show, right here on A360 TV.
All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. Before we went to break, we were just having, of course, a continuation of our conversation with Jessica about the difference between networking and super connecting. And of course, Jessica, you know, it's kind of funny that you say that, right? That the networker sometimes may not enjoy being in community with people. You know, that's kind of like saying that you're going to be a swimmer, but you won't even step foot in the pool type of thing. It's kind of like oxymoronic.
It is, right? Exactly. You will never imagine what people do that they don't want to do, but they do it for the money, for the financial return, right? It's crazy.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree. You know, Jessica, you know, when you brought the marathon thing, right, this kind of like sparked an idea in my head. Like, you know, there's key factors in everything, right? Especially when we're establishing ourselves in whether it's the coaching space or the strategist space or maybe the consultant space, right? So I'm curious for you, Jessica, maybe what are some key factors, right, in establishing ourselves as a recognized voice in kind of the more elevated space of healing and personal development through sharing our stories?
Yeah, this is great. I think that when it comes to, you know, your personal brand and then, of course, you're telling your story, especially your origin story, right? I think that it's different if you are a coach, if you're a consultant, or if you are, you said also strategist, right? And strategist, I define myself as strategist because there's something in between, you know, a consultant and a coach. So, and I use both modalities, and I have clients that are coaches and entrepreneurs, but then I have clients as well that are still in corporate. Maybe they're corporate executives, right? Because I come from the world of corporate. I still know it very well. I still have my connections there. And so, of course, it is the dimension of, you know, my work as well. So to tell you the truth, I have seen over the past 2 years that when it comes to your personal story, which I think is like the focus of this question, right? When it comes to your personal story, there is much more that is shared by coaches rather than consultants. And so, yeah. And so because coaches are more embodied than consultants. And embodied, I don't mean like embodiment practices, like in your body, like drop from the mind into your body. I don't mean that. I mean that you're really the personification of what you teach. And usually what we said before about the hero's journey and about your challenge that you're able to overcome, right? And you develop a methodology. And now that you made it to the other side, you want to help people also get to the other side through the methodology that you have created, right? I think that usually applies to coaching more than consulting. Consulting is still an arena that is quite formal. And where there's competence, right? There is the rational competence, the expertise, and of course, you know, the education as well. But the story and the embodiment, the personification, and all of these things, like, yeah, is not that developed yet. Like I am kind of in between being a strategist, in between consulting and coaching. But I think that when it comes to my story, I am more on the coaching side of things. And this is something that I recommend to consultants as well. This is the change that I'm trying to drive as well. But I think this is going to take some time, and not everybody's going to be up for it, to be honest with you. Because consultants, maybe they have corporate clients and they think that they have to be respectable. And if they tell their story, they're not going to be respectable. And I have, you know, sometimes it's understandable, of course, but I think there will still be a way. We still have to create a way in order for us to be able to share our story and still be respectable, even in corporate environments. And I always say, you know, actually, I've forgotten what I just wanted to say. We'll come back in a second, but I go back to what I wanted to say 2 minutes ago. And I think that, you know, when it's about coaching, we are bringing together the brain and the heart, because through the story, we have the heart. So we basically tapping into emotions, right? And when it comes to competence, though, because we said we still have authority because we developed a methodology that works, and we still have this leadership. So like, at least the methodology, the authority, it's in the brain as well as competence, right? It's the expertise. So it's more rational, right? I think that in coaching is more well-rounded. And so we have both the brain and the heart. And in consulting, we have mostly the brain, less the heart. But the thing is, we make decisions actually emotionally, and then we justify them rationally. And so if we really want to impact somebody and drive them to do something, which could be buying, which could be taking action, any action of any kind, to be honest, then we need to involve both dimensions, the heart and the brain. And I think that this is why, to be honest, I think that coaches works better than consulting. But of course, we have to see as well, are we working with? Are we working with a corporation, or are we working with, a person as well? That plays certainly a role too. But this is what I have noticed in storytelling when it comes to these two professions, the coach and the consultant. And then there's the other thing that I wanted to let you know, but I've forgotten. I hope it comes back soon.
It will, Jessica, I think you really hit on something, right? That there's this level of formality that goes with consulting, right? Where coaching has the blend of the heart and the mind. With consulting, it's more of kind of the clear-cut drive. This is what I'm here to offer you, and you either accept the offer or, on to the next one type of thing, right? And then kind of the strategist, right? It's the strategist is more of the blending of the two, right? Where you've got the heart and the heart and the brain connection, like in coaching, and then you've got the book knowledge of the consultant. So it's like mirrored together. And in my eyes, Jessica, I feel like the world is more leaning somewhat. We're getting there, where there's kind of becoming a blend of the coaching principles and aspects along with consulting. But I think there's still some obviously gray in there because of the world of social media, where you mentioned it, all these different gurus, experts telling you, well, this is how it works, this is how that works. When I've already seen, even in my own social media, that a lot of those methods that they've created are not effective. Yeah. So I think it goes back to discernment and really being intentional about where's your passion, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, who are you trying to serve, right? Who's your audience? Number three, how can your message, your story be empowered in a way that really resonates with people and also doesn't continue to fall into the mill of everybody else's journey?
Yes.
Jessica, I got to tell you, I knew this conversation was going to be amazing anyway because it's you. But I thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on. We're going to be wrapping up here soon. And I want to ask this question. Something that I always talk about with the Grief Grantor is that we're big on 5 things. Number 1, gratitude. Number 2, resilience. Number 3, intention. Number 4, empowerment. And number 5 is forgiveness. And I talk about forgiveness a lot because of what I went through with my dad. Me and him were at odds for a lot of my life, and it took for him to be at the end of his road for me to be the more mature person and forgive him for being absent, but I was able to be present for him. Yes. So Jessica, for our audience who is tuning in, right? When it comes to forgiveness, right? When it comes to connection, how can individuals leverage the power of forgiveness to build not only a deeper connection to themselves, but also empower their brand?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, to yourself, I think that, to be honest with you, you have to, I'm not going to say that you have to be completely healed, because I think that is not possible. Healing is a continuous journey. We can continue healing until we're 155 years old, right? We'll still be healing, right? And so I don't really subscribe to certain theories that, especially in the coaching industry, that tell you, okay, work with me for 3 months, you're going to be healed for the rest of your life. No, actually not, right? But I think that, in order to go at least into coaching, or at least, for that matter, also into personal branding, at least you have to have done some personal development work And certainly, right? Because otherwise, if you go and amplify what you have inside, because a lot of times this is what is happening. Like we amplify through our personal brand, we amplify what is going on inside of us. Now, not everything, as you specified as well, of course not, but sometimes we have to, and sometimes even if we don't notice, we still do it, right? And so I think that it's good. Like I always say as well, you can't go into networking or actually super connecting if you haven't done personal development before, or if you go into that and then, you know, you haven't done personal development before, people will notice. What am I talking about, Portia? I'm saying that in order to become a super connector, you have to have a mindset of abundance. And that, right? And so you share, you create value for people, you share, you're generous and so on, because you don't think that, you know, that there's only a certain number of slices in the cake, in the pie, right? But the pie is infinite. Do you know what I mean? And so that's why you're like, no, I don't have to compete with anybody. I can connect this person with this person, connect left and right, create communities and so on, and be generous. Whereas I think that people, especially the networkers we said before, right? They don't really have this mindset of abundance and generosity. They haven't done the personal development work, and they live in scarcity. And that's why they don't want to be generous, right? So I think it's the same thing with personal branding. You have to have at least done a little bit of personal development, and personal development teaches you abundance, teaches you many things, and it teaches you forgiveness to yourself, and then to be honest to other people as well, because we don't, you know, we don't really create a personal brand in a silo. We create our personal brand through experienced life that we have experienced, in stories and so on. And in stories and in ecosystems, there's always other people. And there are all kinds of dynamics that are going on in a good, positive sense, but in a negative sense as well. And so we all have had misunderstandings, or maybe even, you know, more serious dynamics with people. And I think that, you know, you don't really want to go into personal branding and have this exposure and this influence as well, in a way, and maybe use it against, indirectly or directly, implicitly or explicitly, to hurt somebody. And so I think you have to have this forgiveness before, or maybe if you haven't done it yet, maybe it would be a good time to do it now. You know what I mean? I think that there needs to be a level of harmony inside of us. We can't be completely healed, but there needs to be at least some peace inside of us in order to be able to then go out and spread our message and spread our brand and our values and so on. And I think forgiveness is one of the values that we want to spread as well.
Jessica, you know, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? That personal development piece is key when you're an entrepreneur, right? That, and we're never going to be fully healed. That's a continuous road and journey, right? We'll reach points where we'll encounter a situation 10 years ago and we might have reacted in a certain way, but then we encounter it again, maybe 2 years down the line. We're like, okay, I remember this. I'm going to respond differently, right? Learning to be proactive instead of reactive.
Yes, totally. Definitely. Exactly. And I think that's something that helps. Probably this is something that you talk about as well. It's to think, okay, that person, maybe I'm going to forgive them because that person did the best that they could in that moment with the tools that they had at their disposal. And in that moment, you can shift from maybe anger and resentment to compassion. I think that for forgiveness, maybe the step before forgiveness is compassion. And sometimes maybe we have to dwell a little bit longer in compassion before we can forgive, right? But it's not a problem. If we have compassion, and sooner or later we will be able to forgive, I would say. What do you think?
Oh, 100%. I agree. Like, you've got to learn how to incorporate that, right? And recognize and remember that we're all human, right? Sometimes we have little flubs throughout our journey, but remembering to show yourself grace, because you don't know what you don't know. But once you do know it, remember to show other people that same level of grace that you showed yourself in that moment.
So good. Yes, absolutely. Oh my God. I love this.
I do too. Well, everybody, that was Jessica Fabrizi, also known as JFab, that you heard from here on the Grief Grantor. And that concludes another episode. Until next week, everybody, take care.
Thank you for joining us on the Grief Grantor. May the story shared today light your path and guide your heart toward healing. Remember, with every moment of grief, there's an opportunity for gratitude, resilience, and empowerment. Continue your journey with us online and share your own story, because in this tapestry of life, every thread matters, especially yours.